So some of you might be asking, well, Allison, how do you know how much residue you have on your soil before you pick what tillage process you're going to use? Well, there's a lot of different ways to use it, but one of the most common ways and one of the easiest ways to do it is to do a percentage cover. So you can take a 50-foot cord, and every 6 inches you're going to mark that, and you're going to put that cord out within the field. And so every time a piece of that residue touches that cord, that would be the total. If you add all of that up, the total, that would be the percentage of how much cover you have. And we're going to be able to do this in class this week. So it's going to be, it's kind of one of those more commonly type of ways of measurement in farming, just because it's easy and it does give us a pretty good indication of how much cover we have. So, just as important as timing with planting, timing with tillage is very vital, whether you're doing it in the spring or the fall or the winter. The whole goal is to make sure that we're not only removing that crop, but we're putting it where it should be so that it can hopefully get more organic matter. It can suppress weeds. It's going to allow more. It's going to be able to reduce wind erosion and water erosion better, especially through spring months or winter months if we have some interesting Mother Nature indices. So whether that's an ice storm or a flood or snow, whatever that might be, timing of tillage is really vital, as much vital as it would be to plant. So now let's look at establishing the crop. So obviously most of our crops are established from seed. So farmers will go to a seed salesman or a commercial company and buy their seed. And the whole purpose of these big companies is to give that farmer really high quality seed, but give you different varieties that are adapted to the climatic variables that you have in a specific area. So for example, around here, we always buy seed for the summertime. If we're growing corn or soybeans, we want seed that's drought resistant. So it's going to be able to withstand long periods of time without water. So that's really important. Also, one big thing that these companies have put into place is along with the USDA and the government, it's actually illegal for a grower to save seed from a previous year and grow it the next year. So if I buy seed spring of 2017 and I use it spring of 2018 or 2019, that's actually illegal because these seed companies are coming out with more varieties. So, and they want you to buy those varieties every single year. So here are just a couple of the federal seed laws. The seed has to be labeled, and here are the 9 ways, or excuse me, the 9 ways that it has to be labeled. So it has to have the crop and variety, has to have the lot, so where that seed came from, has to have the pure seed type. If there's any other crop seed with it, has to have the weed seed, germination, and many other different labels that will go along with it. So what hybrid it's from, and just answering all of those questions for farmers. So seed certification, how does that happen? Has to go through a lot of different steps for seed certification to happen. Is regulated by the State Crop Improvement Association. So Wheat Growers Association, Corn Growers Association has to get improvements, or has to be approved by those associations. Helps with the production of those seed consumers as well. And it helps with the genetic uniquenesses or processes that might come out year after year. So how do we calculate pure life seed? I want you to read through this a couple times in your book because we're going to be doing some farmer math this week in class. So all this is just figuring out the viability of that seed and how it's going to lack the weed seeds in intermittent matter. So we're going to take the pure life seed that's determined from the information from that seed tag, and I'll bring in some seed tags for you to do this for. So you're going to take that PLS percentage, and that's going to equal 100 times the percent of germination times the percent of purity. And that is how we then determine the amount of seed that it's going to be necessary to plant at a recommended rate. So we're looking more at seeding rates with this pure live seed. So successful seeding, what does it take? Why is it important? Depth is extremely important. Environmental factors, dormancy, the germination process, how long it's going to take to get above soil. This is very vital in the springtime. especially with frost damage that could happen. Seeding rates, treatment. So if you want if you want a fungicide treatment on your wheat, anything like that that the seed needs to be treated beforehand. Seeding equipment, what it's going to take to actually put that seed into the ground. And then one of the things that farmers do not like to deal with is the seeding date. So when you're actually going to be able to plant that seed, and if it's going to be able to cover, if it's going to be able to not be stopped by any sort of frost or wind damage or water damage, flooding, anything like that. So next is the depth of planting. That was, again, one of the very important establishments of how we plant the seed. If we plant the seed too deep, it's going to exhaust that seed energy. So it might germinate, but it's not going to germinate above the soil because it's too deep. Same kind of thing with the plant being too shallow. It can dry out extremely quick. So if you're if you plant it too shallow, if it's supposed to be planted at 1 inch and you plant it at 1/4 of an inch, it's going to germinate, but it's going to dry out extremely quick when it needs to be covered up. So really important to make sure you have that correct seed depth factors, the seed size, the moisture within the soil, the texture that the soil has, and the morphology of that seed. So some environmental factors that are not fun to deal with when they're not to your liking is moisture. So have to plant at the correct type of moisture. Can't be too wet, can't be too dry. Every single seed has a temperature minimum, maximum, and optimum, and we'll talk about that in class this week. So, for example, corn needs to be planted anywhere between 50 to 55, 54 degrees, and some could argue that, but you definitely can't plant it when it's 40 degrees because it will not come up. Oxygen is very important. Light is extremely important because some of those species will require different types of light. Dormancy. So dormancy is important because we have to look at if that seed is not germinating, why is it not germinating, and is it because of dormancy? And so some barriers that might include are a hard seed coat, chemical compounds, and ripening. So sometimes that dormancy is established for a reason, and we have to make sure we know what we're buying and how we're going to grow that. So the germination process, obviously that seed will first absorb water, and then metabolic processes will start to take place. Shh, Gracie, be quiet. Sorry, Grace is joining me for this lecture. Then those embryos will then start to grow. So that radicle will emerge, and that shoot will then emerge. And so really important to make sure that we have all of those correct. Seeding rates. Seeding rates are very important, and it's going to vary in different types of regions that we have. So the whole purpose of a seeding rate is so that the seed is going to effectively grow and develop throughout the growing season. So if we have low seeding rate, those plant populations are going to be inadequate and you might not get the yield that you want. But if you have too high of a seeding rate, you will see that the light is being very competitive with the light, the nutrients, and then the moisture. And then there's obviously going to be some diminishing response to those increased populations. We're going to talk this week in class about the study that we did in our first ever wheat research plot, and how we did 3 different types of seeding rates within our wheat, and we saw the highest. I'm going to wait to tell you where we saw the highest yield from, but that's just another indication to farmers as to how to enable your seed to grow and how to make it effective throughout the growing season. So this is a graphic that's also in your book, but it just shows you the relationship between the plant population and the yield. Okay, so here's the crop yield is the purple, and the economic yield is, that orange color. So we can definitely see that we're going to yield a lot more than probably what we will get due to plant population density and to the yield. So seed treatment. So we talked a little bit about this. A lot of seeds are treated with a lot of different aspects of controlling different things like fungi, insects, anything to help that germination process happen. We see this more so. In this area we can treat wheat, we can treat soybeans, we can treat corn, whether that's with like a fungicide or a micronutrient. We're able to do that before it's planted. So what do you need to seed it in? What do you need to plant it? First, you need to choose how you're going to do that. We can either broadcast it, we can drill it, or we can broadcast or drill it. And then those are really important to figure out which ones you're going to do. But fortunately, we know if we're going to plant like a corn or soybeans, we're going to plant it. We'll drill it in. We're not going to broadcast it because they will not be in rows. And to grow it properly, they need to be in rows, and to harvest it properly, they need to be in rows. So grain drills are used for that, no-till grass drills, and then row crop planters, which is probably the most common. And then broadcasting would be more so in like a grass type setting or a pasture type setting. Planting corn and soybeans in 30-inch rows is very, very common throughout the whole United States, or wherever you can grow corn and soybeans, just because it fits the harvester, fits the planter, and fits how those seeds need to be growing. So this is what a 30-inch row looks like here. You can see this planter going, and it will have that 30-inch row to the centimeter of where it needs to be, so that growth and development will happen at an efficient time. So planting dates, here are some planting dates. Summer temperate, cool season annuals, we plant early in the spring. Summer tropical, warm season plants, we plant later in the spring. And then winter annuals, we will plant in the summer or early fall. So an example of a winter annual would be like winter wheat. An example of a summer temperate, cool season annual, we'll talk about the difference between corn and soybeans within those two temperate and tropical summers. First crop soybeans, second crop soybeans, and how those interact with both of those early spring and late spring plants. So here's an example of plant population versus corn yield. So if we're planting, if we have a late April, mid-May, and a late May corn plant, we're going to be able to see the benefits that is constitute over many of those plant populations. So we have to take in contact with the plant population and then the corn yield and when it's planted. So if it's planted on those three different months.